Everyone deserves better, and no exception. All right, we are going to pivot into Taurus. Let me turn this off. And Boker Tov, Boker Tov. Good morning, good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
We let me think. We're on next week. People like no, you're not.
Well, I am, but you said that you were not gonna have me, but I
Good.
was forward. Yeah. Next week, you said we're not coming next week for class.
Did I say that? No. I said that for the last week of the year, for the 29th. Right.
Very much.
We're on today's the but don't no worries. Today's the 15th. See, this is a classic. You retired like 3 weeks and like you lose all track. It's all the same, right? Yeah, right. Just schedule, if you ever start watching Judge Judy, schedule an appointment with me. That's when I intervene. That's when I intervene. Or if you switch news channels and suddenly get angrier. Like that also, like that's when I step in. All right, so I think we're here next week. Yes, the 22nd, no, the 29th, or whatever that might be. So that just want to make sure that I have that clear in my head. And with that, we get to say the bracha for Torah study, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And Genesis 2, it's fun stuff. All very loaded. You know what? If I were a smarter human being, I would write down the verse that we leave off with. Thank you. But we all hold ourselves to whatever standards. We'll start. So I'm just gonna start at the beginning of the story, but we'll zip forward a little bit through this. But starting at the beginning of like this key part of the story of chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 4.
Do you have a page, Rabbi? I'm sorry.
Chapter 2, verse 4, whatever page that might be, and whatever.
Oh, okay.
Such an incredible bit. Verse 4 or 5. That's funny. See, it's a Robert Alter hits return at a different point than Richard Elliott Friedman hits return at. Like some of them split verse 4 in half, and some of them, or it puts verse 4 as part of the previous section or as the next section. These are the records, verse 4. These are the records of Friedman. The skies and the earth, when they were created in the day that Lord God is how it's translated in some places, Adonai Elohim in the Hebrew, made the earth and the heavens, no shrub of the field being yet on earth, and no plant of the field yet sprouted. For the Lord God had not caused rain to fall on the earth, and there was no human to till the soil, and wetness would well from the earth to water all the surface of the soil. Then the Lord God fashioned the human, humus from the soil, and blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living creature. So again, note a totally different thing. This, by the way, was actually just picked up this week from Rav Daniel Hartman, like that the part of the two creation stories, part of what's going on is in chapter 1, God creates humanity, and the whole idea is power. You have dominion over everything, essentially, right? Like God is sort of has this power to create with words, and then says creates humans, that you have the power to do all of this. Here, that's Genesis 1. Genesis 2, suddenly there's this hard pivot where there was no human to till the soil. The whole purpose of humanity here is tilling the soil, rather than power. Like the whole chapter 2 suddenly begins, and the human's purpose is service rather than dominion. And you see sort of like these two, maybe contradictory, maybe complementary, like however you want to see it. But chapter 2, notice here, it seems not about power, at least initially. And the wetness, a totally different thing. Again, Alter again like does a nice job with human hummus from the soil, catching the Adama creates Adam. That the earth creates the earthling, which you don't get in most English translation. So human hummus from the soil is a good turn of phrase. Blew into his nostrils the breath of life. So again, like both this combination of the earthly and the divine combined into one being, that's what makes a living creature.
There's another difference, being that man does not commit any sin. He doesn't eat from the tree of knowledge, and yet he must work. In other words, in the first story, if he didn't eat from the tree of knowledge, he wouldn't have to work.
No,
Here,
no, I'm going to contradict that, because there is no tree of knowledge in the first story.
oh, right.
But right, but it does underline a sense that on some level, though it's not, it's the text is somewhat confused, but at any level, you get the sense from that's a key line in that working isn't a curse. What's going to be the curse, but we'll see. Yeah, right. You didn't work where you worked, right? You didn't know my boss. Right. Working is not a curse. What the curse is going to be for Adam, the curse is going to be working and it not being productive, or it being uncertain what the outcome is going to be. That's going to be the curse. But like the working itself, not so.
God put man there to till the soil. He didn't plant a garden and pointed to put man in that garden.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like the text is sort of confused. Is that, but it's a trap. Right. So we'll go through and we'll try and like get what's going on. Like, because so the human is created, and the implication, if you just read this far and stop, you would say that the human is created to till the soil. And again, this chapter 2 doesn't seem to have read chapter 1. Right? Like in chapter 1, you don't get the sense of created from the soil and the breath of life. And certainly you don't get this sense of being created to till the soil. And certainly, well, as we'll see, like it doesn't seem to be the same order of creation that chapter 1 had. Because the vegetation is potentially present, but not fully present in chapter 2. And the animals are about to be created, where, of course, in chapter 1, the animals precede humans in creation. In chapter 2, they follow the human in creation. And in chapter 1, male and female are created together, as it were. And in chapter 2, they're created consecutively. Right? So this is why, again, the traditional way of looking at it is that chapter 2 is just the close-up scene of the wide establishment shot of chapter 1, but you can also read it as two separate and parallel creation stories. This, again, if you're an apricorus who wants to if you want to sacrifice your space in Olam Haba for academic Bible study, you would say that these are two different authors. These are two different authors stitched together. Generally, the assumption is two, meaning that these are two parallel creation stories.
I agree. I'm going outside the box here.
Right.
Do you think that God made a mistake and flipped them around? I mean, later in Genesis, we'll get to God making mistakes. God will say, whoops, essentially, a couple of times.
And
Could be too, if you read it, like he knows what's coming.
I don't know. I think when you read it, well, I mean, we'll read forward. When you read it, I think that God, or to get meta, the character of God as portrayed in the story, is surprised by what's going on. So let's get there. Let's get there. That's chapter 3 already. Let's get there. So verse 8, and the Lord God planted a garden in Eden to the east. And again, notice how like there's a assumption of place by the author, right? When you say to the east, that presumes that the reader is somewhere, and that somewhere isn't Mumbai, as it were, right? Like the somewhere is in the land of Israel. Like they know that the reader is in the land of Israel because Eden is going to be to the east, and the east is going like it's somewhat nowheresville. We're going to be given a location, but the location isn't anywhere that could actually exist. But somewhere probably like Iraq-ish, right? Like that's that seems to be what we're referring to. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden to the east, and he placed there the human he had fashioned. And the Lord God caused to sprout from the soil every tree lovely to look at and good for food. And the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Now, so that's thing one. Notice again, the humans fashioned outside the garden, placed within, and then trees. 10. Now a river runs out of Eden to water the garden, and from there splits off into 4 streams. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that winds through the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is goodly, bdellium is there, and lapis lazuli. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the one that winds through all the land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, the one that goes to the east of Ashur. And the fourth river is Euphrates. So that's we're given like a very specific place, right? There are 4 rivers flowing out of the garden, which can be identified. The Tigris and Euphrates, like are the same words that exist in modern Hebrew or biblical Hebrew and Hebrew for those rivers. Those are easily placed. The other.
In the Solomon story, did he drink from the waters of the jar?
Solomon, I don't know off the top of my head. That is I brought a notepad. There's a spring called Gihon, but it's a different one that's being referred to here. Here, Richard L. Friedman's comment is Gihon, the name is a pun, because later the snake will be cursed that it, and all snakes, must crawl on its belly, which in Hebrew is Gehon. So it's a word that appears here, and a version of it will appear in the following chapter. The names of the other rivers may contain puns as well. For the letters of Euphrates, which is Prat in Hebrew, occur in the next words of the snake's curse, Afar Tehol, if you put the words together, you get the word Prat in it. Pishon contains the same root letters of the word that describes the humans becoming a living being, Nefesh. And the letters of the Tigris, Hadkal, occur in a similar jumble at the end of the story, meaning that if you rearrange the letters again. So all the rivers derive from even both convey geography and hint at the coming events there. So he thinks that this isn't necessarily like that the names of the rivers aren't necessarily because it's a specific name of the river, but also that this may be that they're puns, sort of like seeing what's coming forward. What will be there.
One has to know that the Pishon is the Nile.
Right, Pishon, Nile, because There's one is Pishon is one that circles the land, and Gihon, the land of Cush. Cush is Ethiopia, south of there, right? So, south of Egypt. So that's why I say it's not a place that's possible, which is to say that two of the rivers seem to be in Africa, and two of them seem to be in what's now Iraq, in the Fertile Crescent. So, like, the idea is, again, it's like Springfield and The Simpsons. It sort of exists. Like, no, it's supposed to be, it's like nowhere and everywhere. And like, that's part of the point of it, is that like, you can't put it on a map. And if you want to put it on a map, you're barking up the wrong tree. Trees, yes, trees will remain important. But there is a place, and you have a certain image of it. Verse 15, and the Lord God took the human and set him down in the garden to till it and to watch it. That's one I mentioned before. That's the verse that Rashi says, lured him in with words. And the Lord God commanded the human, saying, from every tree of the garden you may surely eat, but the tree of knowledge, good and evil, you shall not eat, for on the day you eat from it, you are doomed to die. So, one command: don't eat from the one tree. The tree of life is also there. That note is not a concern, not a command not to eat from that, only a command to eat from it. To eat from the tree of knowledge, good and bad.
If you want man, human to be ignorant,
Right. So what is this knowledge? What is this knowledge that is in the tree? Or what is it supposed to be? That's the million-dollar question that is not in any way clear, which is what you get from this.
It can't be clear, though. And what I said last time, it can't be clear because they're innocent and they cannot conceive of evil. They cannot conceive, they don't know what that is, because that's why it's a trap. They have not experienced bad or evil, and they're innocent children.
So right. So Nancy's saying this is a trap because they don't know the difference. They don't know the difference. They don't know what bad is. They're childlike and they can't grasp it.
They can't. They're innocent. And this force, which is supposedly God, not only traps them with temptation, he puts a circuit in there to further entice them. And that's why this is an unfair, unjust trap. And that's why I do believe that these are two separate stories and two separate levels.
Right. So a trap because it's unfair, unjust. They're not equipped to handle the challenge that's going to be thrown at them. Lynn.
Because it's the Garden of Eden, and they are innocent, and they don't know their neighbor. They're innocent.
Oh, what's incredible is is to try and get it from the little amount of information we have. So what we're going to do, let's look at what they say and try and figure out what they know and what they don't know. Wait, Lynn, she can't. That's right. So what's the fruit? The fruit is a marshmallow. Can you put off? Right. So Lynn.
They are innocent children.
Oh.
I guess I'm wondering, is there only one tree and then you're gonna know that that's the tree?
No, there are multiple trees. There are lots of trees, lovely to look at and lovely to eat from. And two of them are highlighted. One of them is forbidden, but there are lots of trees.
So, but does the human know which one is good?
The implication is yes. The implication is yes. There is no we're given precious few details, but the strong implication is they know which one it is.
My whole question is, why would God put that particular tree in the Garden of Eden? So don't go there. but you can go to anywhere else. You know, I mean,
It's a choice.
it's a trap.
Is it a trap or is it? So, all right, so let's go forward with it. Great, I'll stick with altar, the 18. Oh, and by the way, and obviously like the thing to keep in mind, for on the day you eat from it, you are doomed to die. Motimat, like like as we know, if that means that you're going to die that day, then that's not what happens. Verse 18, and the Lord God said, it is not good for the human to be alone. I shall make a sustainer beside him, is Alter's translation. Yeah, interesting. What does JPS give us?
Make a fitting helper for him.
A fitting helper for him. Ezer Kenegdo. King James, the most influential of all, will famously give us a helpmeet beside him. Richard Elliott Friedman gives us, and I don't know, God said, it's not good for the human to be by himself. I will make for him a strength corresponding to him. Now, somewhere between, wait a minute, Richard Agrin, you usually give us Hertz. What does Hertz give us?
Hertz give us, I will make a help meet, M-E-E-T, for him. Not help mate, but help meet.
Right, a helpmeet
Yeah.
is like an Elizabethan way of saying helpmate.
To match him. The Hebrew term kenegdo may mean either at his side, i.e. to fit, associate with, or as over against him, i.e. corresponding to him.
Right, yeah, so somewhere between a helpmate beside him and a strength corresponding to him, there's a gap. Those are very big differences, and like what you think of the story or what you want to think of the story, like sort of like gives you what translation you're going to take, right? Like, so Ezer can mean helper, right? Word for help in modern Hebrew still is Ezra, and of course it's from Ozer, Oz, strength, right? Say Ozi v'zimadia, we sing like sort of God is my strength, right? There will be my strength. Like so, Oz, Adonai Oz lamo yitain, Adonai will give strength to God's people. Like so, you have so could be help, could be strength. Kenegdo could be corresponding to, opposite from, over against is sort of like maybe a little fancier way of saying it. Next to, like what there are any number of different ways of doing it. So the woman who is about to be created is either a helper for the man or a strength opposite the man, an opposing strength or a corresponding strength, or it's not clear what it is. You could do it any way you want, and maybe that's part of the intention. It could be, for all we know, part of the intention to make it vague, but or maybe there's one of those two meanings and the original audience understood it. They understood either helper or they understood strength, an equal strength. The argument for helper is, most of human history, right? Where the male is the principal, to mean, not just to say that this is how most societies were constructed, right? Like the male is the principal and the female acts as the adjunct, right? That's why most human societies have been constructed, where she, and certainly the society where this comes from, she's not a principal in her own regard. She's her father's daughter until she's her husband's wife, and that's her role, right? She's not, she doesn't have full agency. He has full agency, and she is an adjunct to the primary male in her life. So that would be the argument for that they understood it as Ezer, as help. Or you could say strength opposite, which is part of like how the story is going to play out, which is that the animals are going to be proposed as the proper companion for Adam, and they're going to be rejected. And the rejection, presumably, is that they're not fitting companions. You need somebody who is on your level. And the only one who's on the level of Adam is going to be Chava, right? Like, so like that more suggests that this is essentially a relationship of equals rather than a principal and a helper. So you could argue either way.
Alter says it's notoriously difficult to translate it. And I think we could sort of say that given the patriarchal perspective of the entire Judaic tradition and this tradition, that would fit.
Right. You could say it's that. I would say though, I would say that's not it's not so open and shut as that, because sort of as we covered in other parts of the Tanakh, and as we'll see here, unlike in some cultures where women are portrayed as intellectually inferior, you'll note that in the Torah and throughout the Hebrew Bible, women are in a subordinate social position, but not intellectually inferior and not sort of like spiritually inferior, right? Chava is Adam's equal intellectually, it seems, which might not be saying much, but she is. Sarah is certainly Abraham's intellectual equal. Yitzchak isn't Rivka's intellectual equal. She clearly is sharper than he is, right? And Leah and arguably Rivka come off as intellectual equals to Yaakov. When we're given a full picture, we're given a picture of people who are of women not being less than intellectually. They're less than socially. They don't have agency. But, this is why Rivka has to like come up with a whole thing to trick Isaac into giving the blessing, because she doesn't have any social standing, because she doesn't have the social standing to do it herself. But like that's the societal structure. That's not sort of like her. She's perfectly smart. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like it's a patriarchal society. I'm not convinced they see the woman as inherently less than. If anything, it's like undermining that perspective. So so who knows what it means? It means Ezer Kenegdo is a Hebrew, helpmeet next to him, or a strength corresponding to him, something. We don't know. But it's a great line. So, and then what happens next is unbelievable, right? Like the sustainer beside him is Alter's translation. And the Lord God fashioned from the soil each beast of the field and each fowl of the heavens, and brought each to the human to see what he would call it. And whatever the human called a living creature, that was its name. And the human called names to all the cattle and to the fowl of the heavens, and to all the beasts of the field. But for the human, no sustainer beside him was found, as a connector. So this is why the story, again, note the different order of creation. Here, birds and land animals are created after the human, and for the purpose of creating a companion for the human. This is the search. This is the big reality show to find the Ezer Kenegdo, to find the proper companion for Adam, and none are fitting. They all come before him. Adam names them all. This sort of like that seems to, and whatever he names them, that's the name, and that seems to be an important power, is to name, and all of them, this is like the audition. Like, you should have a companion. All the animals and all the birds come forward, and Adam, and no suitable companion is found. And given that we know the end of the story, we know who the suitable companion is, and we also know that in the story, animals, or at least the serpent, can talk, right? So can all the animals talk? I don't know, but at least a serpent can. There are two talking animals in the Tanakh, right? One of them is here, and the other one is Balaam's donkey, right? And there it says very specifically, and God opened the mouth of the donkey, right? So there it's specifically a miraculous zapping the power to it. Here it's not that. Here it's just a natural ability that the nachash, that the serpent has, right? So, and the serpent, as we'll see, can carry a decent conversation and a logical one, right? So this is all a very long-winded way of saying the companion isn't just an intellectual companion, because the serpent can talk and you can carry a decent conversation with. So what is the search for a fitting companion? Sexual companionship.
But God made man, he could make more population.
Correct. This is right. So that's part of what's going on here. Like, is the idea is seemingly he's making more population. First, it's just like, and this is sort of like this weird trial and error thing. Like, oh, you need a companion. And note again that word, like, and God fashioned from the ground every animal of the field and every bird of the skies and brought it to the human to see what he would call it. Like that, like God in this version is creating from the earth again new animals and be like, this. And Adam's like, that's a dog. No. That's a chicken. No, right? Like that seems to be what's going on. And the implication is this a fitting companion, but it's sort of like this total package. It can't just be conversation, though maybe that too, because the Nachash isn't fit, presumably was named by Adam and rejected, right? Part of the background of the whole story is that the Nachash presumably is coming off a fresh rejection. And it's both the intellectual ability and the conversation ability and the sexual compatibility, those things. Both at once. Sorry, Lynn.
But there's no name for them other than woman.
So let's get there. Let's get there in a moment to the naming, right? So they're named. All the animals are named. We're not told. We're not told what those names are. We are just we're right. Animals are all created in chapter 1 on 6:8. That's what I'm saying. Like the stories seem to be independent of each other, because you don't get the feeling. At chapter 1, he made God makes all of the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field and such. And here it's happening again. It feels like it's a separate and new, a different creation story, because again, it's a different. It's a different thing. So a naming is a power given to Adam here. The human gives name to every domestic animal and bird of the skies and every animal of the field, but he does not find for the human a strength corresponding to it. Verse 21. And the Lord God caused a slumber to descend on the human, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed the flesh in its place. And the Lord God built the rib that he had taken from the human into a woman and brought her to the human. And the human said, this time is it, bone from my bones, flesh from my flesh. This shall be called woman, for this one was taken from man. On account of this, A man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his woman or wife, and they become one flesh. And the two of them were naked, the human and his woman, and they were not embarrassed. Yeah.
This is way out there. First of all, if they're the first man and woman, where does their mother and father come from?
Well, I would say that the story has an answer, and that is there is no mother and father. Like that's expressly clear.
Yeah, that would be clear. The other thing is, again, creating two sexes and being a helpmate is one thing, but having sexual relations indicates that God's commandment for be fruitful and multiply is in there, which indicates that God knows that they're mortal and will not necessarily have to, they wouldn't need to create more of themselves if they were going to live forever.
But I think a couple of things. One, I don't think so what I think it'd be, I think that again, this story has to be read, or at first read, you have to read it independently of chapter 1 and just erase chapter 1 from your mind in that sense. Like I don't know if you've seen like Men in Black where they hold up the pen and they erase like that chapter 1. So so you have to forget that because it's not entirely clear. Like clearly, like the like some like read this sort of like as that Adam is that it's like an expressly sexual like sense of relief that he has, like this is it. Like this sort of like that immediate sort of like, oh yeah, this. But does that mean like is there procreation right away? Like what does it mean? Like it's not entirely clear, because remember, of course, the tree of life is not forbidden to them. And the text goes out of its way to make that known to us, that the tree of life is there and is not known to them. And again, like when it's so like, this is like where it's hard to like put together exactly what's going on, because the tree of knowledge, good and evil, is there. And that's when they eat from that is when God says they'll become like one of us.
Rabbi, the fruitful and multiply, isn't that the first story?
That's the first story. That's what I'm saying. Like you have to set that aside for the moment.
There is the fact that woman is nameless. This is a really good point. Woman is nameless, and
So is man. I want to put this in. Adam is a name later on. But Adam here isn't a name. It's not no capital A.
this woman is her name, or Adam, or a female, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
She's part. Okay, she's part, and that's subordinate. I don't care how you look at it. That's subordinate, Rabbi. I know.
I know. So
It's another class to have a feminist approach, so I'm going to give you a lot of credit on that. I'm not going to argue it. But this is subordination. She is nameless, and
he is nameless. They are nameless. Don't single out. Yes.
whatever you call it. But she is part. She comes from him. That is subordination.
So
I
take the opposite side. Man comes from dirt. Woman comes from a union. So which is.
I conceded that. That was a good point.
Yeah.
I could see it.
Not getting the first story. If the first being was half man and half woman, and you split them in half, it doesn't make one subordinate to the other.
Right, you're right. So that's another, and it is, so yeah, so both at once, like one, you do have to forget the first story, and the other thing is like, well, maybe don't forget it, right? So that's the other thing, which is this, like reading that first story, male and female, God created him or it, because there's no gender neutral pronoun, like the male and female, he created them. Like, is this like as the rabbis sort of imagine the two-faced being, and this is again, sellout, not rib, but side, meaning that you just sort of like cut, that this is just a cutting in half of Adam, and then there are two. But it's clear, I will say, that Adam is the principal. They are both nameless. And she, oddly, or maybe not oddly, is identified, or the identity of her, the other, is what allows him to understand himself. I think there's no question here. If we take, she's going to be named, and he has the power of naming. So there is that hierarchy present.
Thank you, Reverend.
He takes orders from her, right? So there is that hierarchy present. He doesn't like, this is like, I think the feminist critiques are important. I don't necessarily think that they are accurate beyond to the story, beyond wanting to like push back again, justifiably push back against a social order. But I don't know if they're like a legitimate, if all of them are accurate reads of the text. So watch what happens, because of course Adam is the one who obeys Chava. So like to say that he is the one giving orders doesn't seem to map onto the story.
But it says him and his woman, it doesn't say woman and her man.
Right, correct. So Adam is the primary. So that's definitely there. That's Zot Pa'am, Etzem Ma'atzmi, Uvasarim V'Sari, bone for my bones and flesh for my flesh. Zot Ikra Isha, Ki Me'ish, L'chachazot. So Friedman's comment, in addition to its literal meaning in this case, the woman is formed from the bone of the man. The expression has figurative meaning of persons belonging to one another. Will be called woman. The Septuagint and Samaritan read her man, Isha, with a mapik in the hay, from grammar fans, which makes the pun better. And that reading avoids both the grammatical problem and the social problem that the Hebrew Isha is not in fact the feminine of the Hebrew ish. And so one, Adam identifies Isha, and then he identifies himself as Ish. Previous to that, he has not identified himself as Ish, as man. Possibly because man has no meaning absent woman. It's only on seeing the other that he can identify himself, which is the way the world works. You don't know who you are until you're face to face with someone who's different. This is, why you travel or whatever the case may be, right? Or read a book of a different culture or whatever the case may be. You can't understand yourself if you don't come face to face with another, with somebody who's different. And that is this moment. First, he sees Isha, and then suddenly understands that he is Ish, but he never knows that he is Ish before he sees Isha. Right.
I just noticed something else here. Up till now, till verse 24, everything, well, God did this, this happened, that happened. All of a sudden now they're giving a lesson here. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his
Right.
mother. All of a sudden.
It's this weird, like the narrator.
That's in the future, it's not the past anymore, and and father and mother were never mentioned, wife was never mentioned.
Right.
And all of a sudden there it is.
Right. So
One verse.
okay, so a couple of things going on here. One, it is weird that suddenly like the narrator steps in this sort of like, and so we learn. It's the rabbinic move of that you know the sermon is within 10 minutes of its end. It's like, and therefore we learn.
Verse 24, therefore, these words were spoken by God and imply a prohibition to do so. What is this?
Baruch Hashem. There's a lot of there's a lot of good Rashi here. A lot of good Rashi in the sense of if I were to read it, I would want Nancy to sign a waiver. Because if you think the text is bad, wait till you'll hear the Rashi. So all right, do you want this? Let me give this to you. This will this we can all give a third wave feminist read of. Vayevain, literally God built the woman, right, out from the man. It's a vayevain, the word is God, and God built. Ke vinyan, Rashi's comment is, God builds the woman like a building. Rachava milamata uveketara milamala, wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. Lekabel havlad, to hold the child. Ka'otzer shel chitim, like a storehouse of wheat, which is wide at the bottom and narrow at the top, so that its burden should not weigh heavily against its walls. So Rashi like builds it, and he said literally builds it the way that we would build a silo or whatever the case may be, which is sort of in a pyramid structure to bear the load of what's going to have to be born. So like literally, like when they say it, like this is Rashi's read, and that is not the worst thing on this page. This, by the way, these are the kind of things that like we can that like in rabbinical school, like that we were like, oh my gosh, can you believe this? We'll never be able to say this in an actual synagogue, or that like every so often I'll say like Rabbi Cece, have you seen Rashi on X? And she'll roll her eyes and be like, yes, I have like the. So no, this is there's actually a lot like this. Right. So that's right. So this is explained. I mean, evolutionarily, on some level, you'd say the same thing. That human that the way humans are designed for the function that they will have. Right. There actually is an evolutionary reason why female hips are this way and male hips are that way. Like that's not, I mean, it's something that we can laugh at and things like that, but also like there's sort of an actual reason why that's the case, which is that it doesn't work otherwise. Zot pa'am, when Which is also, I think, Rashi's point. Like the Zotpam, when Adam says this time, what does he mean this time? Right? When he says this time is bones of my bones and flesh of my flesh, what does it mean this time? Milamad, Rashi says, this teaches us Adam al kol behema v'chaya v'lo nikara da'ato bahem. This teaches us that Adam had relations with every species of animal and beast, but his mind was not cooled through them. So what does it mean this time? And the answer is, I've tried this. When he sees woman, he says, this time, this is my fitting helper, right? So what is this time? That means that all the other times it didn't work, which is to say, and I think this actually is the implication of the text, that Adam, like God says, is this a fitting companion for you? And Adam's like, no, but it's not like no rejected on sight. It's no, this is not sexually satisfying.
So we're supposed to believe that sodomy was committed in the Garden of Eden?
Well, yeah, bestiality. I think that's the traditional read. That's the traditional read. This is what when I like I promised like at the beginning of class that this is going to have like all the secrets that like you never wanted to know or that we can't teach in Hebrew school. I don't think that they're puritanical, meaning the tradition isn't that way, meaning that sex isn't bad.
Yeah, but it's not bad if you're innocent. Which is supposed.
No. Even then, I think that freighting sex with all of the burden that's placed on it is the post-Edenic situation, right? Here, it's not quite clear that they're more like animals, like where there's just no shame in it. There's
But it's all that this is a separate second story.
yes, I mean it is a separate second story, and it is the case that Adam is the principal, and that Chava is the not principal, or she's not the main character in the story at this point. She'll eventually become sort of like the co-lead, but like certainly he's the first one we've met, and he's the yeah. His name is certainly first on the on it. Where does Lilith come in? Lilith is not in the Hebrew text.
Is she in the commentary?
Yes. She I mean, well, I would say I actually do think like that you can get the sex with animals, I think, from the text itself. You don't need the midrash for that. What's the essential thing of men and women? And yeah, it's sexual differentiation, right? It's not an intellectual differentiation. It's a sexual one. And so like the idea is coupling up. So that's thing one. That seems to be part of what this is coming to explain. And so like the parading of like looking for, and the fact that, again, like the fact that it takes women for this to happen and the animals were rejected suggests that they're not proper sexual partners. And I think that is actually the implication of the text. And what's more is I think that's what the original audience would have heard. They would have been like, this is it. Like, yeah. No, that's chapter 1. I erased that one from your head. Right, yeah. So I think that's erase it from your head. Like the 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 about BCLE not being okay. The
There can't be any decision of good and evil when good and evil hasn't been tasted.
well, this is the thing, but like that's part of the problem, and we'll get to that obviously in chapter 3, like right away, because they have to know. I don't know if it's good obedience or good or evil, or obedience or disobedience, which is a little different, right? Like because on some level, I mean, we get to say like if they're supposed to know not to eat from the tree, they have to have some knowledge of like what to do and what not to do. And the serpent can be very specific in how this stuff plays out. So let's we're not gonna get there, but all right. So the end of chapter 2, they were both naked, and not ashamed. So there's a lot going on there. One, the word for naked is arum, which same word as it's the same word that's going to be used to describe the snake in the very next word, the next verse. Arum means naked, and also means it's cunning. Is how that's usually translated, that the snake is manipulative and sharp, and that is and it's the same word that's used for naked, both. So naked, like the way the grammar usually is assumed to be smooth, i.e. not hairy, and just like that sort of like smoothness and slickness imply, like in English we still have cunning. Like if somebody's cunning, they're a little slick, they're a little smooth. He's a smooth talker. The 42nd president had a nickname, right? Slick Willie, right? And that which is a there's both a cunning with words, and it often has a sexual overtone. Same guy. A sexual overtone, like with that as well. So like that's here. They're naked and they're not ashamed, which again implies this child, which is where I think is the strongest support for what Nancy was saying before, that they're childlike. And we said this before, like again, if a 2-year-old walks in naked, no one cares. If a 12-year-old walks in, you do care, right? Like that, like that's there's a pre-sexual awareness. Nakedness means something entirely different. And the implication of the two of them is that they not live, or for an animal, right? Like that there's that they're living in a different way of conceiving of sexuality.
The note on that, not ashamed, was because before eating of the forbidden fruit, they did not know passion.
Right. And
it's also that sex was as innocent as eating or drinking.
right. Natural, right. So we have like among the the core natural drives are these things, right? You know, both with humans and with animals. Right. So this leads to sort of like a concept that maybe that they're adults. So there is sex in Eden. It's just not freighted with the weight that that later comes on it. It's like animals. It's just a natural function without any sort of like social difficulty going on it, without all the meaning that gets put on it.
There are no other potential partners.
Right. And no gap between, right. And no gap, like that's part of what we're going to see like in the next one, like when the serpent starts asking the things of Eve, then you notice that suddenly there's a gap in her, like it's introduced to her, it dawns on her that that desire that mind and body can be separate. Right? She will decide whether or not to eat. And again, like that sort of like decision-making thing is the first step in self-consciousness. She becomes self-conscious. And that self-consciousness is what changes everything. The animal, we're guessing, doesn't have self-consciousness, or even like the small child barely has self-consciousness. That's part of the innocence. And here, she's like the serpent's going to introduce the idea into her head that she becomes self-conscious, and she does. One last thing, which is that for better or for worse, and we can say for worse, if you want there is no word in Hebrew for wife that's independent of the word for woman. That's why you can translate it either way. Sometimes it's his wife, and sometimes it's his woman, which has a particular sort of Stanley sense in English, right? Pardon me? Right. His woman in English sounds like, like you're wearing a, like white t-shirt, shouting about your woman, right? Like the wife has like a different implication. Hebrew, it's the same word, right? His woman, his wife, it's just the same thing. And by the way, that's true in modern Hebrew. And just because we want to make sure that we make it worse, the word in modern Hebrew for husband, Adon, or Baal, meaning master, right? So the word for woman and wife is the same, and the word for husband is master. Right. So, I mean, this is everyone should have a problem with that. The sort of amazing thing is like, given especially like the comparatively egalitarian ethos of the early Zionists, that wasn't like changed upon the reinvention of Hebrew, and many people do use it. Like there is sort of a move. And by the way, in the the prophets imagine usually one of their main metaphors is God as the long-suffering husband and Israel as the straying wife, as in a relationship. And I think it's Micha says that, like, in days to come, in this messianic vision, you will no longer call me Ba'ali, my master, my husband, my master, but you call me Ishi, my man, my husband, right? Meaning that Ish and Isha as a parallel co-equal relationship rather than a hierarchical one, implying that the ideal relationship is a co-equal relationship and not a hierarchical one. So that next time, Adkan, next time, chapter 3 and no, we'll do it next week. So yes, we'll be here on the 22nd, and no on the 29th. So that.
Gonna have to sue it.